This is Fan Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch channels for the first time with Kimberly Sullivan. And thank you for being on the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Phantom.
So we want to let people know we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You can see the icon up there that says listen on Newsly. If you use coupon code GHOST, you can get 1 month free premium subscription. So you can stop scrolling and listening. We're a featured podcast on Newsly. So you'll be able to listen to us within an hour or two after the podcast. And you can get 1 month free if you use that coupon code of GHOST. So thank you again for being on the program. And we've been podcasting since 2016. So we're at over 840 episodes. So we've been around for a little
Wow.
bit. People might not know us, but yeah, it's we've kind of started with musicians. Then we went to poets, and
Uh-huh.
then we went to filmmakers and actors, and we started talking to authors and all different types of people. So
Wow.
we've expanded our content. So this is where we are now talking to. We've been talking to authors probably since the beginning, but it's primarily had been a music focus. But we enjoy talking to all kind of creative
That's
people.
great.
And I guess the first have is like, did you always know you wanted to be an author, or when did you start feeling that you wanted to write? As a person, when did you start? What age did you think you started at?
Yeah, well, I feel almost as if I came full circle because I used to, when I was younger, I loved creative writing. And so I used to write a lot of stories and I used to do small publishing when I was younger. But then I worked for many years as a journalist. And now for many years, I've been working in international development. So that's working in developing countries, largely in Africa and in Asia, with projects that they do on gender, on population, on lowering child labor, sadly, in many countries, and a lot of issues like this. So I'm of course doing a lot of writing for that, but it's very scientific, it's very careful. So on the side, I decided to get back into my love for creative writing. And so, yes, I moonlight as an author. And so I've really enjoyed that. So it's really been the last year and a half that I've started publishing novels. But for the last 10, 15 years, I've been publishing short stories, so in anthologies and journals. And I love that creativity. I really like getting back to the creative writing where, it doesn't have to go through 10 people first. I don't have to look as
Hmm.
carefully at the language and how things are. I just get to create things on the page. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's kind of like where musicians are today, because we used to have to go through the gatekeepers at labels, and now,
Exactly.
I have my home studio here with all my Moogs and my Rolands
Oh,
and stuff. So I
fabulous.
have all my multi tracks, and I've been multi tracking since I was like 17. But
Oh, wow.
I just was into music, and I never gave it up. All my friends, it was something. It was a passion. My day job is I'm an IT guy, but
Okay.
I'm
So
a
same
designer,
thing.
a
You're
software
sure,
designer.
sure,
But
sure. Ah,
but I got
fabulous.
into music at 17, and I never gave it up. I kept on going. And a lot of people around me, they're like, well, if I can't play like Jimmy Page, if I don't get the contract, I'm going to stop. And I always did it because I love to do it. And so when I ask
Yeah.
creative people I usually interview, they continue to be creative just because they love it, not because they
Yeah.
were going to reach certain, the top 10 or top 20 in that field. It's because they have a passion for it.
Yeah.
Is that the way you feel?
That is, I do like doing something creative that way. I mean, not like you. Unfortunately, I did not continue with it, but I used to love music. I still love music, but I don't do it as much. I played the violin quite seriously for many
Oh, awesome.
years, and then through high school and college, and was in lots of orchestras and spent a lot of time every single day. And sadly, that I did just with moving for work. I did
Mhm.
eventually give it up. And that is something that I think, oh my goodness, I've got to go back and really start again because I let so many years go by. But I love going to concerts. I love music. I have such respect for people who are good in music and continue because I know all of the effort that goes into it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
no,
it's
I'm
kinda like a lot of times the arts
yeah,
are kinda like, schools get rid of art programs. And, they
yeah,
they don't understand that, like, being a musician is like a team sport. It's a team thing,
exactly.
just like sports. because I used to
Yep.
play in orchestras and I played in bands,
Yep.
and the communication you have within an orchestra or
Oh,
like a
I
rock
know.
band, or a
Yeah.
fusion jazz band, that's a skill set that's important in this world with creatives, have at to the forefront now in all these social media places, to be able to be a creative person, be able to communicate with other creative people is a certain
Absolutely.
skill, and it's actually,
Absolutely.
it's not thought of as being important in some cases. Oh, you should be a lawyer, you should be a doctor, you should be this, and if you look at, oh, you're a musician, they're like, oh, what's your real job? you know?
No, I know that's a real mistake because it's true exactly what you said. I mean, what happens? The school districts have to cut something, and what do they decide to do? They decide to go for the music classes or the art classes, or today, sadly, also the PE classes that kids
Yeah,
need that time, right? You need
for
that
health.
time
Yeah,
during the day too. And even the more you're doing on an academic level, the harder classes you're taking. I mean, that was always just such a nice time of the day, right? Concentrating
yeah,
on orchestra, doing something different. It's also good for your brain to do something different
yeah.
during the day. And that's, I
Well,
mean,
they
I feel
say
that
that,
with writing.
yeah, with brain health, they're saying if you're a
Yeah.
creative person, like for example, like a piano player, because
Hmm.
they have to use the left and right hand, and a
Oh,
guitar
sure.
player uses the left and right hand, that helps with like dementia and Alzheimer's, to be able to
Oh,
work your brain
absolutely.
in that kind of way,
Yeah, yeah,
is
no.
very important. It's like playing chess. It's like if you
Yeah.
make use of your brain in ways that you might not, understand, but there's eye-hand coordination that's similar to sports, and
Hmm.
the creative mind just goes and activates places in your brain that if you're just
Hmm.
doing like routine tasks or just repetitive tasks rather than imagination tasks, they were taking in dreams, taking in all these different things. So I guess as a writer, you've been a technical writer, but you're doing more like, historical fiction
Yep.
is there, I guess, one in short stories and women's fiction. And so when you, I think as a creative person, I always say as an artist, is like if somebody go out on the street and I see somebody and I kind of document what I see a
Hmm.
story, and I take that and
Exactly.
I become empathetic, and then I also take my own experience and I take whatever's going on in my subconscious, and I kind of just let it go. Is
Very
that how, like a writer, we write lyrics is part of like
sure.
it's like a short version of a novel. We create sound
Absolutely.
paintings or cinematic ideas, but you take things and make them a lot longer than we would as a
True,
musician.
true. But it's yeah, but the idea is exactly the same. And yes, so much comes into the writing. So the umbrella that I go under, even though I write different, I write short stories, I write contemporary, I write historical, but it's all under the umbrella, let's say, of women's fiction.
Mhm.
And women's fiction. Or sometimes it's known as also book club fiction, but it's generally very much, even though there's a plot and there are a lot of things that are interesting that happens. I mean, the primary thing for women's fiction is really the interior journey of the protagonist or
Mhm.
protagonist, because a lot of times I do dual timeline. So you're very interested in, yeah, in the interior thoughts and how they're developing as a person and having to overcome some hardships. So this is often something I'm looking at. And because I love history and because I lived for many years in Italy, I'm from New York originally, but I've been living in Italy for 25 years, so a long
That's
time
awesome.
now. It's yeah, it inspires me a lot too because there are a lot of things here. I mean, obviously there's a fascinating history here, and
And
I
art
usually want to
history
explore exactly. I
art
want to
history is like,
explore something.
yeah, it's
Art
incredible.
history, okay, I came very close in college to triple majoring with art history. I am not artistically talented at all, but I love art. I mean, I love
Yeah,
going to museums. I love discovering art. And it was one of these things that I joke because living in Italy, of course, it became the most important subject that I've
yeah,
ever studied because you go everywhere. You go to
everywhere
not
it's
just a
art.
museum, but everywhere is art. And you just walk
Yeah,
into one of the churches and you have, here in Rome, we have all of these Caravaggio in the churches that you can just go and see just pop in. So, yeah, it's
yeah, it's
pretty
just the
nice.
essence of, like, that type of, m when I think about places like that, like, I actually lived in Tokyo for 2 years in
Oh, Japan is
2004, so
wonderful.
and Japan is similar in some ways because
Yep.
it's got thousands of years old history. In the
Hmm.
middle of the Tokyo, you have these, like, these, like, spiritual areas.
Yeah.
that have this
Yeah.
really old, like, architecture and stuff in them, and
Sure.
amazing, like, Shinto spiritual
Hmm.
type stuff, and you're like, "Wow." And then you have all this modern stuff
Modern
happening
Tokyo.
at the same time, and so
Yeah.
you could go to an onsen near Mount Fuji and get, like, a really traditional type of structure of the Japanese kinda mindset, or you in Tokyo, you get a lot of art. Because I mean, the one thing I
Yeah.
always was interested, I'd be on the
Absolutely.
subway, and there's salarymen reading manga, you know,
Yeah.
and they're
Exactly. Which is such a
in tight, really, like, amazing suits and ties, and they read, what we Americans would think is a comic book, but that's very big in the culture, is the art
sure.
is, like, everywhere,
It's an
and the
art
music
form.
is, like, yeah, and everywhere there's all this music, and I was always amazed at the interpretations the Japanese musicians had, like, in Shibuya and Roppongi. They had these areas
Uh-huh.
where they were doing everything. They went from, like,
Oh,
fusion to
wow.
jazz to R&B to their own, and it was all their own version of it,
Oh,
and they were singing in
fantastic.
Japanese, and I just, as a musician, I was so amazed at the ability to kinda integrate multiple
Yep.
forms. It was
Yeah.
all over the culture, and I felt it was, like, probably the way you feel in Italy is, like, it's a big art area in
Yeah.
terms of what can happen.
Yeah.
East meets west, though, so it's kind of like a mouse, a lot of weird things happening.
It's funny though. Unlike you, I haven't lived in Japan. I've only visited, but I love it as a country. But I think there's a lot of affinity actually with Italy and Japan from what I've seen and from Japanese colleagues and friends that I've had because they're very like Italy. They're very obsessed also with food. They've got a real food
Yeah, food,
culture
real
in
food,
Japan,
food culture.
like they do in here. They really, it's not, they adopt lots of new traditions and things, but they really maintain their
The
traditions, which I
original,
think
yeah,
is
the original.
very much like Italy as well. Of course, they get a lot of the things from America, things from other countries, but they really maintain their own traditions too, very much like the Japanese. And yeah, it's a mixture of the old that they really appreciate. Unlike sadly in some countries, especially in Asia, they've been kind of tearing down some of their
Oh,
beautiful
yeah, in
historical
China,
buildings, whereas in Japan they maintain it, but they also have their modern society and they build things that are new. Maybe the Italians less certainly than the Japanese, but it's the
yeah,
same
you're
type of
probably
thing.
more
It's that living
classical.
within history, but in the modern
Yeah,
world. And I love that. I love that about both. And they just have, I think they have a real aesthetic style. I love Japanese gardens. I love the
yeah, it's very
care that they
artistic.
take
Yeah.
exactly also with their furniture, with the things interior. It's very simple design, very beautiful. They have a real sense of style, I think, like the Italians. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
always
Swedish
I always see it
design
as
is
yeah,
pretty similar. I mean, design, is somewhat similar to some Japanese design, but you get this, they have a really interesting take on design. I was always really
yep.
impressed, even the cars, the cars and the tech and everything, and the musical instruments. I was hanging in, Electric Town, being a synthesist, and I go to the Roland factory, go to the Yamaha area, and just,
Uh-huh.
like, see all this, like, the creativity. Like, they designed some of the world's
Wow.
first synthesizer,
Oh,
and
wow.
so that was like, like the Roland, Jupiter and Yamaha DX7. They're all Japanese, and they're big in
Fantastic.
new wave and jazz and fusion. There's, a lot of these Japanese instruments were, like, handmade, even though they're
Wow.
electronic, they were,
Incredible.
like, hand built, and so I was very much impressed with the design, of what they
Yeah.
do. Is like they over engineer things. They
Yeah.
overbuild. As if you ever dealt with Sony stuff, it's like it's
Sure.
really, it just, that mindset was like the zero defect idea. It's actually in the culture that you should.
Yep.
And when I was working in IT, it was really kind of hard because I had American, people who say, "Well, have them accept 85%." And they said, "No, they want 99.9. They want 99.9, no defects." And let's the American
Yeah,
guys were
but
like, "No, we don't do that."
yeah, but that's so much fun to be in another culture and to really and in fact that's why for you as a musician and for me as a writer, I mean it's great for us to be outside of what
Yeah,
we grew up with, to be in a different place because you look at it, for you, you're bringing in all of the influences that you get from that in your music and what you learn there. And for me, I'm observing so much of it and putting it into my writing, obviously. And I think, a lot of my stories do have that sense, because I write a lot about, obviously, about Italy, and I have a lot of expatriates in the stories. And so it's always looking at it through those eyes.
Any
And I
kind of
like this
lens.
idea of a different culture and being put in a different culture, and what that means to you as well. I mean, how you change and the struggles, because it's not Hollywood where you just go and then the next day, you're speaking the language and everything is easy. I like those difficulties that you have to put in there, and to make it a process of going through. So it's fun.
So expat life is what we've been talking about, and I really would encourage a lot of people who are creative to kind of, if they can travel, because travel really, it does, feed the soul and it feeds the heart, and like a lot of creativity is like heart, mind, soul, right?
Yep,
It's kind of this
absolutely.
idea of like tapping in, and when you write, do you feel like you're taught, you're connecting to the muse, or do you like it, or because some people have this idea, like, and I've always was into like romantic poets like Blake,
Hmm.
Tennyson,
Hmm.
Wordsworth, Longfellow. I
Absolutely.
was and the idea of this muse, this idea that you're connecting to this kind of universal idea, and you, as a creative, you can kind of channel it. Do you feel that is part of the way you view how you do your work, your creativity?
I do, because actually, strangely, for being a writer, I'm very visual. So I usually, my story ideas generally come from a real sense of place. So usually the stories that I have, it's because some physical area has really touched me, and I've seen the site itself, and I've seen it, and that's in my mind first, even before the characters and the full
Hmm.
story. I'll have my general themes and everything, but it's really a sense of place that I have to have first. And with writers, we usually talk about two styles. So it's either pantser and plotter. I think the British call them more planners. The plotters are the planners. But I'm very much a pantser, which means that exactly this kind of, I have this idea, I have this general idea that I want to explore, but I have to only explore on the page. So once I get writing, that's when I explore my characters. That's when I get down to the deeper level psychologically of the characters. So yeah, it can feel a bit like a muse too, because I have something that's really spurring me on, but at the same point, then it's all coming together on the page. And at least I'm lucky that I write quite quickly, so I do actually go through the writing very, very quickly in a very quick phase. Then of course I have to go back and do all of the editing, which takes much
Mhm.
longer.
Do you
So
like to use, like, a pen or just a typewriter or a computer?
I love calligraphy in general. I love writing
Writing
like that. But today, I
is
must say I've
too
switched
hard.
over to the.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just
probably
so
hard because then
easy.
you gotta retype it all. I mean, you got
I
like,
know.
as a musician, because 'cause we're writing, like, short form,
Uh-huh.
so I have a lot of notebooks and, like, like, spiral notepads, and we'll write the lyrics down. But a lot of what we do, what I call is, like, stream of consciousness, where
Uh-huh.
I like to just turn a multi-track on and sit by my piano and just play what I have kinda going. I might have an idea, I might have a central theme, and then I'll just
Okay.
kinda just trust myself and just put it down, and not
Fantastic.
try to
Yeah,
go start and stop, start and stop. Just let it go out as a complete thought,
exactly.
and then maybe go back and edit it.
Yep.
Is that a style, like, in writing? Do you have, like, a stream of consciousness thing, and then you go back and try to find the nuggets and structure it?
The same type of thing, that I think it works better if you try to get it all out. And especially with writing, I mean, your first draft is for you, right? And then I clean it up before I get it to trusted beta readers, and then my editor won't see it for a long time beyond that. But I think it's really important, as you said, a kind of same stream of consciousness, because you have these ideas, and as you're getting them on the page, then later on you'll go in and seed other things into it, because you know how the story is going to develop. So at the second round of edits, you'll go back and maybe put in other things. But I'm very much of the belief of allowing yourself to really be fully creative and going through. You can always remove things later, you can always
Yeah.
change things, but I like this really going through, and then ideas come out that you hadn't thought about before, which is why I don't like to plan it too much.
Yeah.
And as a writer, I used to feel bad about that. I used to think, oh,
Yeah.
it's much better to do a whole structure and to have everything done. And then I remember that I read, actually, I don't read a lot of these kind of police procedurals, thrillers, but I was
Mhm.
reading one that I really liked, an Irish author. Whose name is Tana French. She's she's gotten to be very famous in recent years, and she writes these wonderful books that take place in Dublin. And it's
Mhm.
funny because if you read it, a lot of times it's in dialect too, so you can actually hear the
Yeah, you
Irish
can hear
accent
it.
in your voice when you're. And I thought, oh, okay, well, she writes this, where you have to do a whole case and then there's the killer or whoever at the end. So she must plan it perfectly. And I read an interview with her that said, no, I never plan it out. I have to go along and do it because if I know in the beginning who did it and how this is going to be resolved, then everyone, the reader, will know it as
We'll
well.
figure it out. Yeah.
So I thought, well, if she does it, okay, for women's fiction and historical fiction, I can do it too.
That was
And I,
interesting because I found that, like, I was talking to a classical musician one time, and they're highly skilled, right? And they can sheet
sure.
read. And the one thing I found is a lot of classical musicians that can sheet read, if you put them with a jazz fusion band or a rock band, they don't know how to kind of improvise stream of consciousness because they're so tied to the page. They're tied to the sheet reading that compared to like
Yeah,
rock musicians or fusion musicians or musicians that are looser and maybe
sure.
don't sheet read, that they're more stream of consciousness. And I've always
Oh,
been
absolutely.
of that mindset that like, wow, I always thought because of their technical capability
Yeah.
that they'd
Yeah.
easily be able to do it. But they're translating Chopin and Beethoven and
Hmm.
Bach, but they tend to not be able to write that. They read it,
Yeah.
but they don't
Yeah.
write it. And so they when they get into a fusion group or other group, they're like, "Oh, well, what am I gonna play?" It's like, "Well, why don't you just play what you feel?" And they're like, "No, and somebody needs to write it down."
Yeah,
You're
no,
like,
I
"Okay."
I can get that because I would probably when I did violin, I would feel more comfortable with the others. I had plenty of friends who played in jazz bands, and I used to love to go, and I like jazz, and I used to go like watch it, but I would never be able to, or at least I don't have the skill set for doing that. It would be really hard for me to adjust to that, and so it's interesting because yeah, you can equally love music, but you have a way that you've been trained that's the way that's your fallback, and you
They
would have
kinda
to
you kinda yeah, it
relearn it.
locks you into your training, and I always
Yep,
heard at Berkeley, like, the professor say, like, "We taught you the theory, now you need to
yep,
break the rules."
yep.
Right? So I
No,
think
no,
a lot of times
exactly.
as creatives, like, you might have been, you went through and you had the book knowledge, you might have your master's, you might have a PhD, but it's actually the doing of
Yep,
it, that you learn things, and then kinda in music, we break a lot of rules. To
sure,
create new genres, it's like you change what the normal rule is to do. Like funk changed the rule, it
sure.
changed to where the beat was going to fall on, and it was, oh, that's not what you should normally do, and then became a totally different genre because it
Yeah,
isn't what
yeah,
you would do in the other genre, but it's that kind of creativity that causes like something new then because you're not rehashing. I think in this kind of AI
absolutely.
clip and cut and paste world, it's hard, for creators because there's so many people just wanna clone what's already been done.
Yeah, yeah. How do you feel for AI for music? Because right now it just looks awful for
I'm
writing.
very very I really don't like it because I get an example. There was this DJ, and I won't name
Uh-huh,
him,
uh-huh.
actually went and used Eminem's voice in an
Oh
AI
gosh.
program to say something that Eminem never said, and then
Yeah,
played it in a concert, and I have a problem as a musician, is if,
sure.
like, you're gonna use his voice to say something he never said. What if he
Hmm.
doesn't agree with that, right? And you put that
No,
out in front of
absolutely.
hundreds of thousands of people, and so that's a whole thing, and then the other thing is, like, it's going and scanning the web for, like, it sound like Burt Bacharach, right? And then it'll
Yeah,
grab stuff that sounds like Burt Bacharach because it is, and then
Uh-huh.
rearrange it. And then, well, is his publishing company going to get any credit for that? Because they don't pay him. And so I got a problem with grabbing people's art and not getting given the credit and
Oh
acting
yeah,
like you did something
absolutely.
new. It's like I'd
Yeah,
rather just go and interpret as a musician for a
sure.
back rack and then play the chords from my. I listen to it and then I interpret it in my own way rather
Yeah.
than
No, no,
line by
absolutely.
line, cloning it. And that's why I think the issue with AI is that yeah, you'll make a lot of people that seem to be musicians, but they're not really musicians, producers moving things around.
Yeah. No, no, no. And it just seems like it's going to be a standardization because, even again, it's very new. So, but looking at the things that are writing, it just looks really not very exciting. It's kind of the music of the, the
Very
music
boring.
world, right? The elevator music of the music world. And then
Yeah,
you're going to have
yeah.
the writing the same boring, not interesting. I don't know. We'll find out. But I must say that
It's kind of like
since
I
you
always
look
point
like
out to
this,
people, if you listen to if you go to the top 10 for 1973 or
mhm,
1974 in pop music, you compare it to the top 10 today. The
mhm,
top 10 from 73 and 74, people are going to keep on playing
yeah,
forever.
yeah. No, no,
People,
sure.
but I doubt that the top 10 from last week is going to keep on getting played forever. And it's because
Yep,
of the cutting and pasting and non-original thought going on in music right now. There's a lot of
yeah.
people just rehashing what used to be instead of moving forward, like the Beatles or
Sure,
Frank
sure, sure.
Zappa or you know Pink Floyd or even the old Motown guys. It's like where is that? It's very small amount of people are doing really good work.
Yeah,
In
no, but even longer careers you're seeing for many of, let's say, the really popular music and everything,
classic,
there are songs that are big, but these longer careers that last longer period of time, it seems to be a little bit, at least a little bit less so today.
yeah, we're kind of living in the age of the Spotify playlist.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
like the 2-minute attention span, and that's the one thing with the with an author,
Yeah.
your audience has a longer attention span than the normal social media type of audience today. Because if somebody's gonna read a book, they can't just read 2 minutes of a book. They're gonna read, pretty much either once they get into it, they're gonna read the whole thing.
Yes, but also for readers, it's changed today. And in fact, that's one of the reasons that I am an indie author and don't really have much interest in traditional publishing because because I think that also the industry is going more towards, which makes sense. I can understand it. I I do have a background with strategy and marketing, so I get why they have to do it. But I can use as an example, like my second book is, which actually you'll appreciate because there are also romantic poets in this. It's called Dark Blue Waves, and it's a time travel story. About a woman who loves, because I absolutely love Jane Austen, so I wanted to do
Mhm,
something to go back to
mhm,
that time. And so it's an American who goes to Bath to the UK, and she is studying for her master's in British literature of the 19th century. And so she's fascinated by this. She loves everything. She loves Jane Austen. But what happens is, of course, she travels back in time, and even though she knows so much on the written page, she doesn't actually, it's different living there, right? I mean, you can learn
yeah,
about
yeah, it's
something, but until you're
yeah,
there and you actually
you would
have to
know.
do the things, and she sees things around her that, by our modern views, I mean, she sees lots of children working right out in the fields. And of course, at that time, children didn't really,
Child
most
labor
of
is
them
big.
died
Yeah, it's
at
pretty
childbirth
yeah,
or didn't make it to the age of 5. Then, measles breaks out, and she's trying to do things to change the situation without allowing herself to be known to be from the modern world. So there are a lot of things that, even again, if you read about it, it has an impact on you when you go there. But the title, because I should say, I tend to take my titles from more famous, since you were talking about that, but it's a little bit different, from more famous authors. The Dark Blue Waves is a line of poetry from Lord Byron. And so when she
mhm,
travels back to 1813, Lord Byron was I guess the bad boy, the rock star of
Yeah, he's like the rock star
1813
at the
because
time. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone talked
He's like,
about Lord Byron. He was going off on these adventures. He'd write about his travels to foreign lands. And he speaks about these dark blue waves, which would have been of the Mediterranean Sea, right? That carry him off to these foreign lands and his adventures. And so she feels an affinity with that too. This idea of that's the situation she's in. She can't let it be known that she's from the modern world. She's trying really hard to blend in, but getting
mm,
herself into trouble a lot. And so I like that
yeah,
idea too
that's
of
interesting.
reevaluating right from the modern view and looking what was big at the time. And also as a student, she was never a big Lord Byron fan, right? When she was reading it, she wasn't her favorite. But when she goes back and everyone's speaking about it, and that's the he's
Such a
changed
pop
poetry
culture. Yeah.
entirely back then. It also makes her reevaluate as well. So that's kind of fun to play with. I like that as well.
That's interesting because she's an independent modern woman in an age where women didn't have a lot of independence. And and
Absolutely.
and it would be kinda hard to kinda hold yourself back when I guess the men are being as rude as they would be because that's their natural state in that point in
Yeah,
time. They'd be
yes and no, but she reflects on that. You're absolutely right. And actually, I have her going back and reading. You might be familiar with Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Women, right at the end of the
Mhm.
1700s. She was the mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote
Mary Shelley and
Frankenstein.
Frankenstein. Yeah, yeah.
But the point was that by today's standards, that it wasn't that strange, the book that she wrote, because she didn't say that women should be the same as men and should have, but she said that women should be educated up to a certain level so
Mhm.
that they could raise their children, and have that role within the family. But that was really quite shocking at the time. And so I have
Yeah,
my character going back, because she, like many of us, I love political theory and I've read those books, but you would have forgotten, right? So she's going back and reading to understand what would have been considered revolutionary back in 1813, because she's,
yeah, yeah.
to
She might
understand how to
accidentally
behave.
just say it out of off the cuff, and then everybody, like, eyebrows raised like, "What?"
But with this book, it is quite long. It's okay, so in words it's 120,000 words, and just to understand, that would be hard to publish traditionally. When I first started looking at
Oh,
whether I would traditionally publish, they were saying, yeah, people don't have the
attention
attention
span.
span for that, and unless you're a very famous author, you're not going to be able to get that. You'd have to cut it down to 65,000.
Wow.
And the thing is that I've had this edited, I've gone through the proofreader, I've gone through my beta readers. The people who've read it and who like this really enjoy this. I've gotten great reviews from it. I really
Mhm.
enjoy it, and people who've read it said it just goes by so quickly. And honestly, I think it would have ruined it to cut. I'm not saying that every
Yeah,
book I don't write 120,000 every, but it really made sense for the book. And I thought, once I started talking to publishers about that, I said, no, I don't want to
yeah,
have
it's
to
very
cut back,
arbitrary.
because people's attention spans are uh, very
But
short
then
today. I'd
yeah,
rather get the smaller view of real readers who enjoy it, and maybe that's a niche market. I don't care. And so that's one of the
mhm.
reasons that I like doing it, because, and in fact, in the book, she does point out that, because that Steve Jobs said books are dead, right? Which was quite ironic, because he
Yeah.
sent his own kids to a classic school where they didn't have technology, and they read
Cool.
the classics.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but in the book she does play with that, because she's getting all of these people who don't, in her modern life, who don't care about literature, who think it's a waste of time.
Yeah,
And then when she goes back to 1813, what did you do in the evening? You sat around and you read
yeah,
poetry,
that's
right?
true. Yeah.
And so she's thinking, oh wow, this is not the same technology that we have today, a much slower lifestyle. Yes, there are many negatives, and she sees that too, but she feels comfortable with this art of conversation with people who spend time talking about literature, people who, instead of, I don't know, the biggest boy band, they like Lord Byron and, and the poetry.
Well, it
So
also is like the when you were around the people who were illiterate, they would read things to a complete thought. And the problem with the modern era is we have so many inputs and so
Yep.
many channels that nobody's reading Moby Dick. Nobody's
Which
going
is a
back
mistake.
or reading the
Yeah.
Iliad because they're on their Twitter, they're on their Twitch,
Yeah, but
they're
that's a
doing the
mistake.
face.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you might on the other hand might have people saying, well, these books are bad, and people are choosing to ban books.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so you're
Yeah,
like, what the?
that's
So you have this whole thing where people are challenging like what is like art, and because they have a different lens. And so to
yeah,
me, it's like, like, okay, well, if you don't like it, that's fine. Don't try to get rid of it.
yeah.
Because all art is just like in music too. I mean, we have A&R people would say you got to make something a minute and 52 seconds. But what if you write like Genesis or Yes or Pink Floyd, and you write a song
They wouldn't
that's
have allowed them to do it today, isn't that great?
yeah, pretty much. Even
Yeah,
back when they were doing it, they were telling them they probably shouldn't do it, but they were a little more
but they were
lenient.
still doing it. Yeah,
They
yeah.
would still do
Got
it.
it.
The artists would just do it. Like Hotel California, they were told them they're Eagles and they were making money, and they told them that's too long, and they said no. They did it. And then Bohemian Rhapsody, Freddie Mercury
Exactly.
had to actually make a film of that to get it to go out because they weren't going to put it out. His record label wasn't going to put it out, and so even though they saw what they could do, they still and
Pushing back.
that's why I tell people today is like the A&R people don't always know what's going on because
Yeah,
they're going to tell people like I believe that your piece of work it serves the piece. So if it need to be that many words that serves the piece, have an arbitrary guide person say it should be 60,000. It's like
yeah.
somebody telling me it should be 2 minutes when it's a 6 minute song, and it really doesn't start getting legs until minute 3 minutes in. So then you
Yeah.
miss the whole point.
No, no, it's true. I get their point because they're looking at it from a marketing perspective and they're saying this is what sells, this is what has sold in these years, so this is what we're going to do. But that's why I'm very glad that there is. That's why I gave up very quickly on the idea of traditional publishing because I said, in the end, perhaps like you too, I have a day job. I have this structure. I have no problem with that, right? You need to go through lots of layers of
Yeah.
approvals and this and that. But then I said, in my writing, no, I don't need that. I want to have complete
Yeah,
control
you
and I
wanna
want
have
to do it the
control.
way. And it's
Yeah.
not that it breaks so much, but also the other thing is that as a writer, you can get pigeonholed, which I also understand. It's a marketing thing, right? So if
Mhm.
I write, which I do, I write a lot of historical fiction, right? So if I start writing historical fiction and having success with historical fiction, and then I say, oh, I want to do a modern, contemporary short story,
You'd be like,
most
"No."
fair
That's
enough, most agents and everything would say, no, no, that's not a good idea.
yeah.
And I want to be able to write what I want to do. And I do think I get the marketing side of it, but I also like a reader. I'm an eclectic reader too. I mean, and if I like an author, I will follow an author. Okay, I get if you write Christian fiction, you're not going to write erotica, and you're not going to get people who are going to switch like that. But if it's
Yeah.
within the general women's
Yeah.
fiction, and if one is an historical and one is a short story, if you like the writer, I think you can easily follow. I don't think people are as rigid, or most people are as rigid as
No, no,
people in the industry think we are. Right? That we only
all all
we
all
only
the
buy one
industries
record
are
type. We only buy one book type. No, I mean not always.
yeah, I mean, that's what's so crazy sometimes in the industry with the lanes,
Yeah.
because if like one of my the great periods I liked was like the new wave era,
Hmm.
which is like in '78 into the '90s.
Sure, sure.
You what the thing about it is it was influenced by punk, ska, reggae, world music, rock music, disco, funk. New wave bands, if you listen closely, they're not just all synth. They have multiple forms of multiple genres all colliding together.
Yeah.
And what it was is like it was like the I guess the evolution of progressive rock into a more digestible format where a progressive rock band like a Yes
Hmm.
would do these crazy long songs, but then if you brought it down to 4 minutes and then still had all the passages in it and then had all that eclectic capability, that's where you saw the new wave movement, and it was coming from multiple areas. And today people want to just, oh, I want EDM, I want I want
Yeah.
hip hop, or I want like a big beat. They have trance. You have all these very narrow lanes, and people say, "Oh, you
Yeah.
can't cross them." And I'm like, "Well,
Yeah.
that's not the way music has been. It's always been a cross."
Yeah. I think that I don't, I mean, I don't really like all of the standardization for things, and I do think that I get when you're marketing and when you're putting money behind it and you want to have a sure thing. I get it from their perspective, but yeah, I don't necessarily want to be a part of that. I'm sure that you feel the same with music, but I think right now with writing, and this wasn't the case some years ago, but when I started exploring going into writing, the indie market wasn't as good. It was still kind of new. It was a little bit
New
harder to get into it, but I think now it offers a lot of flexibility. And I know also a lot of traditionally published authors with big publishing houses. And when they want to do something creative or something that's going to be like in the
to go indie.
historical, as you've probably seen, everything is World War II. If you want to do something that's not World War II
Oh, it's,
era, and you want to
yeah,
do
right.
something, a lot of times they will have a traditional publishing for their World War II or whatever, but then they'll do something else more creative. Um, Not that it's not creative, but something different, right? That
Different, yeah,
is not always the
and
same era because everyone has to do that. They'll indie publish that. And I think that's a great flexibility. And quite frankly, I mean, yes, I'm very fascinated by World War II, but I'm kind of sick of reading about it as
yeah,
well. I
people
want
get
to read
stuck on.
different things. I don't always want the same. It's
Well, that's
like
the
with the
thing is,
AI we were talking about, right? I don't want the standard all the time.
that's the problem with the marketing is they always want to go with what the numbers
Yeah.
say worked. And I've
Yeah.
always been the kind of person like, well, William Blake didn't work in his time,
Yeah.
right? No, nobody even knew who he was. He's a modern day Victorian classic, and during his time, nobody knew who he was.
Absolutely.
And the way I look at it, like a guy like Lou Reed, the Velvet Underground is considered one of the greatest bands ever. Nobody really listened to them except all the producers,
Yeah.
right? And so sometimes just because you didn't succeed in the marketplace doesn't mean you don't have value. And the problem I think today we have a very kind of society that feels like it has to have money value or marketing value or it's not worth doing. And I
Yeah.
think that's a
Yeah.
mistake from a creative standpoint because if you have an idea, sometimes it's good to put that out in the world because you never know if you're going to be like the next William Blake, or the next Lou Reed.
Well,
You
it's
know, you
also
know,
what you want to do. I mean, I have to say that perhaps you and I have flexibility too because we have other careers, right? So we're doing this as our second. I call it moonlighting. I have no
yeah,
problem with doing that because eventually when I retire from my job, I'd like to do this full time. But, for me, that also gives me tremendous freedom because I don't actually have to do it. Yeah,
to make
if I had
money,
to do it,
primary,
if I had been younger when I started, and if I were counting on it for my, to
primary,
be able to pay the rent and everything else, then yeah, I'd probably have to do what I was expected to do and
force
do it.
into
But
it.
since
Yeah,
I
that
have more
structure.
freedom, I take advantage of it. Even I have a short story collection coming out in May, and because I love short stories, I've always loved short stories.
Anthologies.
I just find it fun, and I write them a lot of times between novels too, because it's nice to take a break and do something shorter with a shorter story arc, and where you really have to delve into one, maybe two characters, but that's it. Um, but they don't sell. Unfortunately, I
Did-
say that really as
did-
someone who loves it. People
They
don't
don't. So
take on
have?
short stories.
Do they have
So, but
like
as an
back?
indie, I decided to do it anyway because I said, you know what? If five people read it, I am happy because it's actually doing fairly well because I've got it out for early reviews. But I said, as individually, I don't have to count on a publisher or anything to do it. I'm going to get it out there because I love it. And I'm going to have other novels coming out. I already have my novel after that kind of ready, but I decided to squeeze in short story collection because why not? I can.
That's interesting because like a lot of science fiction, there used to be like science fiction short story magazines, like Isaac
Yeah.
Asimov, I mean, like Harlan Ellison. He would
In
have
some genres, you still
still have that.
can find a little bit of a science fiction, and I think uh, like horror, like a Stephen King, he also writes a lot of short stories. I think this
Stories.
can still have it, but in general,
It doesn't
short
work.
stories just don't sell. They still are in magazines, in journals, things like this, but as a collection. And I
Yeah,
have to say, as someone who I personally find this annoying that they don't sell, because I've been lucky to live in a lot of countries and to learn languages when I'm in the country. And my first point of reference when I'm learning a language isn't reading novels. It's
the
starting off
short
with the short
stories.
stories. I always do that. I always start with short stories because um, you can really get into the character easily. It's not so complex because it's a shorter character arc. That doesn't mean the
That's a
stories are
good idea.
simple, but it's easier for you when you're learning a language to start with the short stories before you're getting into full
Yeah,
novels. So, for
that's a
me,
good
I've
approach.
counted on them.
That's a really cool approach. I hadn't thought about that, but I had always been into short stories just because I was a sci-fi
Yeah.
kid, a
And they
Trekkie.
still are around, luckily, at least.
Yeah, and I always like anthology series like Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone and
Yeah.
Outer Limits, and the idea of having these short form, and they were all coming from like the sci-fi magazines. A lot of those stories from Outer Limits and
Yeah.
and the Twilight Zone were kind of adapted from short story forms that had been in magazines. But it's interesting. I always wondered why the modern kind of online type of publishing hasn't found a way to do an anthology type of online magazine. Maybe they exist. I just don't know
They
where
they
they are.
do. They do exist and they do have them. And also because people's attention spans are shorter, you do find short stories. Like there are sites that have short stories and publish a short
Mm.
story a day. Also now very big is flash fiction.
Oh, that's
I tend to like writing a little bit longer, but I have two flash fiction stories in because I have 21 stories in the collection, and two, I decided to give it a try with flash fiction, which is really short because flash fiction, it depends. A lot of times when you're sending it into magazines, they have different, like they might do less than 500 words, but generally it would be less than 1,000 words
okay.
would be considered to be
That's
flash fiction rather
interesting.
than
I'll
short
have to go
story.
check that out.
Yeah,
So,
and that's
are you
very
into
popular now too.
are you into audiobooks? Have your books been translated to audio, or you find that that's a good way
I
to reach your audience?
I have, because I'm not a real listener of audiobooks, which is a shame because I should be, because they're getting big. Years ago, I used to listen to them sometimes because I was driving more. And so I used to listen to them in the car,
Mhm.
years and
Yeah,
years ago. But
commutes.
now, of
Yeah.
course, they have a new life. They're so much more popular now than they ever have been in the past. So I will be doing my third novel, In the Shadow of the Apennines. I'm now trying to set that up for audio and working with that. And again, as an indie, you work with voice actors, and
Voice
they
actors to do it.
yeah, and then you can
Well,
arrange
do
that
you
and
get to
everything.
actually direct who's gonna do it?
Yep, there are a lot of the ways that it works for, I mean, it's the same way that a traditional publisher would work in the same way with the voice actors. There's a lot of work through indie authors now that you work and do the contract with the voice actors. You get auditions,
Okay.
and you listen to the different voices, and then you listen also every chapter they submit to you, so you listen to that, and if there's anything to be corrected or anything that was misunderstood or misinterpreted or things like that, you can get back to them, and they will fix
Oh,
that.
so it feels like you're directing your,
Yeah,
like a radio play.
absolutely. It's like being a producer in the end of a program. So yeah, it's quite nice. So I do want to do. I haven't done up until now the two things. And that's the other thing. As an indie, you do that. I mean, you get to you do everything that way. And then the other thing is, I'd like to do a little bit of translation because I'm over here in Italy.
Yeah, the different
I
languages.
would like to translate into Italian, and then I can do a little bit more with the bookstores here and book signings and things. And since I speak the language, that would be kind of nice.
Now, as a book marketing, strategy, have you like in music, what we do today, because streaming doesn't really pay. But what we do is we license for video games, advertising, film,
Ah,
Twitch boards, and so we go through our pro organizations like ASCAP and BMI, and I have some of my music licensed for Twitch gamers. So if they want
oh
to put
wow.
my music
Okay,
behind
sure.
what they're doing, I actually get commission and I get a higher rate than I do from
Uh-uh.
Spotify or Apple. So a lot of what we do now in the music industry is you get higher rates for like everything other than like the streaming services. Like, so if I put my music in an independent film, I'll get a higher royalty rate. Or if I put it into a video game, get a way higher rate than I will if it's on Apple. Not that it isn't on
Oh,
Apple,
wow,
but
that's really
you have more.
interesting.
So I'm wondering, like, when you are an independent author, do you try to get your property licensed for like teleplays and screenplays and TV and all that and internet TV?
Yeah, I haven't really done that. I mean, I started my first novel was October 2021, so it hasn't been that long. And right now, honestly, it's a nice learning curve. So I've been doing this up the
Mhm.
up
Yeah,
the
yeah.
learning curve, going up, up, up. And now I have a pretty good because I write the stories, then I get it out to beta readers, then I get it to my editor, it comes back to me, then I check it, get to the proofer. So I'm getting this all here about how to get it out.
How to get
And
out there.
also because I'm trying to get basically 2 books a year. And so far I've been managing that. But once I'm in a better state that it's in a, that I have everything, knowing how the workflow works and everything, then I would explore other areas. Absolutely. But right now, I think the two that I want to look at more are the
Audio.
audiobooks, which of course is another revenue stream. And then since you have the rights then for foreign editions, that is also,
Yeah,
that can
that's
be
a good
quite
place
nice.
to go.
Yeah.
Because
So I
that's
think I'll start with
interesting.
that.
So in the artist community, when I've talked to other authors, is like that beta reading group
Yeah,
is very important. Now, as an
absolutely.
independent writer, did you already have people that you've trusted, or did you find ways to get to that group of beta readers?
Yeah, both. I've always had writing groups, and so within the writing groups, and speaking with authors, you probably heard that. Then you're working together. I'm reading their work, they're reading my work, and we come back with impressions, suggestions. We can talk together about plot points that we're having difficulty with, and it's nice because they get to know your writing style and have an idea. One of the things with beta groups that what works and what doesn't work is that if people are I imagine this could be the same for you with with music for this. I mean, you do have a style and things that you want to do. So if someone is coming in and suggesting a whole new story, that's not going
Right.
to work. But if they know
Yeah.
your writing style, they know what you want to do, and they come in and they suggest improvements, that's great. I mean, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. So yeah, I do always work with beta readers and have trusted readers of people who are not, because I work with writers themselves, but I also work with people who I know are just really avid readers. With what I'm working on now, I used because I'm in professional associations, and one of the professional associations has a group of really dedicated readers of historical fiction.
Oh,
And
excellent.
so I tried for the first time. So this is blind beta readers. So they read it and then they come back to you, and they're not writers themselves, but they're really purely readers. They love the genre, and
Mhm.
so I got some very interesting feedback that way as well, because then you have people who are just looking at it as a reader themselves and what they like and what they think. But yeah, you've got to get your work out there, I think. I mean, as much as I love the writing process, and then you do it all and then it's in your head, it's really important to get it in front of people before you get it to your editor, so that you can fix anything. There are things that you're too much in your own head, and so certain
Mm.
things can seem very clear to you, but maybe you didn't get it out clear enough on the page, and that's where your beta readers will really come in and say, yeah, but that doesn't make that much sense to me, you're missing something there. And then you'll go, oh yeah, right, I maybe I cut a scene, maybe I did something, and you can go back and you can really make sure it flows. So it improves your work a lot, I have to say.
Yeah, so it sounds like an interesting thing because the author community probably is somewhat similar with musicians. Like we usually have trusted, listeners that
Hmm.
or other producers or other musicians I've been playing with, since I was 17. And I have one guy I played with in a basement garage band. So when I have an
Uh, uh,
idea,
uh, uh.
he kind of knows my style, and
Exactly.
he's very honest about whether he thinks it's working or not. But no,
Hmm.
sometimes like, his opinion, I take it with a lot of weight. But also, if I'm trying something really different, then I'm like, okay, I might go listen to what my SoundCloud audience says.
Yep.
because we have
Yeah.
places that we can throw demos out into SoundCloud before it hits Spotify, before it hits other
Okay. Oh,
places.
that's interesting. I did not realize that. Yeah,
Yeah, a
you
lot of
see, and the
times we
same
use it.
type of thing. It's a different, I mean, because I think both are really valuable, but you probably want to have your fellow musician friends to look at it, but exactly having people who are more primarily listeners, right? Because that's going to be
Yeah,
your audience too. So I think you, at least with writing, and perhaps you'll tell me if it's the same with music, but you can make a mistake of having it too much with other writers and just be writing for other
yeah,
writers and forgetting your readers. So I think it is, in an ideal world, it's good to mix those up because you get different feedback.
yeah, because a lot of times with SoundCloud is used a lot for demos.
Hmm.
And then you can get like a real hardcore group of fans into like electronica or into new wave, and you
Okay.
say, "Here's a
Oh,
new
interesting.
wave
Yeah. So
song,"
then you're really
and you can
reaching out to your listeners, to the
yeah, you can
specific
actually
group.
hit a group of people that's
Yep.
what they listen to, and
Yep.
then they'll suddenly say they like it or they don't like it or they give you comments, and they'll give comments
Interesting.
like right on like the like 2 minutes and 13 seconds. I like this, and I really
Mhm.
they give very detailed comments.
Yeah.
These are
Yeah.
very attentive,
Yep.
active listeners, which are probably
Sophisticated
similar
listeners and sophisticated. Yeah. No, no,
compared to your
that's
beta
really
readers.
important.
Yeah, yeah, it's
The
like your
same
beta
type of
readers.
thing. You have to find your audience. Like, for instance, actually, not always. Like, a lot of times, I have to say, I don't write romance. There are,
Hmm.
let's say, romantic elements in my book, but the romance is not the primary. It's not the romance books, let's say. Maybe with the exception of the one that I have in the 1813, there's a romance in there that a lot of romance writers said to me, "Ah, yeah, but that could also be classified in addition to women's fiction to romance." But I have had in the past romance writers who have been beta readers. And I have to say, they're incredible because I don't know if you know, but like science, since you like science fiction, and also fantasy is another one, they write so many books per year. I mean, they have
Yeah,
voracious readers, as you probably know from science fiction, and their readers expect them. It's not, you can't get out one book a year,
you
or
gotta do
they
you
want a
do
lot. They
5 books
want
in a row.
one right after another. And so by doing that, they get very skilled in their craft. Okay, now maybe romance is a little bit formulaic because they have certain, they have to write it within the strictures and this and that. However, you don't write that many. But I mean, I know a lot of people say, "Oh, romance books," but you don't write that type of a book and so many books and not get good at writing.
Yeah,
They write a lot. They know things, and I have to say, some of the best beta readers that I have been romance writers. And I tell them, look, it's not a romance, so please don't try to turn it into that,
into it,
with,
yeah, so they might want
and
to.
they say, no, no, we know, they know the rules for, how women's fiction is a little bit more different and but they give excellent advice because, the more you
Yeah.
write, the better you're going to get, right?
Yeah, it's like a studio musician. Like if you're
Yep.
playing with somebody that's a studio bass player versus somebody that's like, they're in on hundreds of people's, if not thousands of people's tracks. And so they know what they're doing. So if you give them a bass
Exactly.
line and you think you did a good job, it's like, well, I played, you need to like, and you can take it or leave it, but a lot of times it's actually really good advice because it's like that person is they've played
Yep.
so much, like they've
Yeah.
written
No,
so
no, no,
much.
sure.
They have a feel for it, and they can just like right off the bat, they say, "Hey, you just need to do something here because like a little tweak here." And like a lot of times they're really cool about telling you. They're not like red marking your whole thing. It's very constructive feedback. When
Yeah.
you get somebody that like understands where you're going and they say, "Hey, just tweak it here and do that," versus somebody red marking the whole thing, then you're like, okay, you're probably not gonna take all that advice because you're saying, well, this guy wants to change this to
Yeah.
something else. So
Yeah.
they're not really hearing it. So like, okay, I hear what you're saying. So I guess when you have like a thought and somebody radically wants to shift it, then you're like, well, they're not really getting it, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I guess there's degrees of everything when you deal with stuff. But
Yeah. Well, I think like in music, as in writing, you have to get used to. I mean, I know some people don't like to get criticism. but I think it's really good. And I think, again, you don't have to take all, but you can't take all of it. If you have a lot of beta readers, people will have different directions. People have, you
Mhm.
have to, you have to make an executive decision on what works, what doesn't. You should know your own writing too, to know what you want to do, what you don't want to do, but at the same point, you should take all of that and make as much from it as you can. And I think that some, like I know a lot of writers who will not read the reviews. They say, no, 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 because, yeah, okay, you're going to get some mean reviews, but that's life, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
don't really, you shouldn't, I don't
Yeah.
think that, I think you should get used to doing it from the beginning, because even, a lot of times, even negative reviews, it always gives you some information. I mean, maybe it's not your ideal reader, it's not, but I think it's always helpful to get that. And I think that, for writers, the sooner you get used to getting feedback and criticism and being able to find what of that you can use to change things, and what maybe isn't really your goal, and your story is still strong without this suggestion, and maybe it's changing a little bit too much. You get good at doing that in the end, at getting the criticism, but you have to be open to it. And I would imagine it's the same for you with music.
Well, the thing about music that's interesting is like you write 100 songs, and like most of the time, only one or two of them work, right? So a
Yeah,
lot of times in music, failure is like the normal thing, right?
yeah,
So the normal course of our creativity is we have thousands of songs as writers, and 10, only maybe 10 or 20 of them actually go anywhere, right? And
yeah,
so if you're lucky. So the most of the time you're gonna fail. And the way I look at
yeah,
it when I teach other producers and musicians is like you throw it at the wall, you do it because you need to find out. And a lot of times we're not the best judge of what we think works. I
sure.
could be sitting around thinking this song out of 10 songs is the one. And then I put it, and the one I put out, is on SoundCloud. I say, this is the one I think is the best one. And the one I decide, I don't know if I should put it out, put it out. I'm not usually artists are not really good choice. They're not the best person to pick what should be heard. And so a lot
Yeah,
of
that
times
can
I
make
tell people that you have to kind of put it out there and let the world know about it. Cause if you got 1,000 songs and you only pick one, because you
yeah,
don't think the rest are ready. There could be tons of songs in that group that actually are the one, but
yeah,
you're too self-critical and you won't let people
that's a
hear it.
good point.
And that is a mistake as a creative person. I've found that like, sometimes you actually have to be willing to fail and just put it out and see
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah. And I think that's another real similarity with writing, because I do think at a certain point, and we're all like that. I mean, we all want it to be as perfect as possible, right? Before you get it out for people to see. But I think you have to find that sweet spot where it's clean, and it's not filled with typos, because of course when you're writing things quickly, you're going back, you're editing, it's clean, it reads cleanly. But you know if you wait for it to be perfect before you even get it out to that first round of readers, right?
Yeah,
I know people who've been writing forever, and they're writing the same novel forever, and they're never good, because they keep going back and they keep
that's
changing,
it.
and they keep waiting for it to be perfect. And you need to write faster than that. Now, that doesn't, I don't mean sloppy, you're still going to get
Mhm.
it good, but you need to get it out to those readers to get their input, and then make the changes, rather than making, you know, I know people who do 10 revisions of the entire novel before, and no one even looks at it first. And I think that my impression, I mean, everyone should do it the way they're
Yeah,
comfortable, but
yeah,
I think you've got to find a way to be able to get it out and get that feedback and incorporate it. And what, at least for me, it works very well. And it's the reason that I can put out 2 books a year, because I
yeah,
get it to a good point, but then I get the feedback, I take the feedback, I make the changes, then I get it to my editor, incorporate any of her feedback. You need to start doing this, but I think people, one, because it's yours, right? And so you
yeah.
you want it to be absolutely perfect, but I think you really can spend so much time just not getting it out in the world, or maybe scared because you're afraid that what's going to come back. But I think once you let it go, it's a little bit easier than in the next ones.
Yeah, one of the things I always tell people, like in music, if you think about it, if you go back to the 60s and the 70s, there's a lot of things in the recordings that people would call like accidents or happy accidents or errors. A
Yeah.
lot of music
Mhm.
from the 70s and 60s, if you really listen, it has production errors in it. And it
Ah,
actually is part of the song. and it's
Okay.
part of the nature of it, that they allowed it to come through because they actually had character. There's something about with
Yeah.
art, sometimes
Yeah.
something that's not totally perfect, like a key change that wasn't expected or a timing change on the drums that's not
Uh-huh.
expected, actually is character.
That adds to it. Yeah.
And it adds to
Yeah.
the character of the song. If you try to make it totally clean, it
Yeah.
actually doesn't have feel, and
Yeah.
it loses kind of soul and feel. And
It's
I think
AI
maybe in writing that
music.
can happen too. Yeah,
It's
you get to the
AI
point where, like,
music
if you
or
have
AI writing.
yeah, because if you have a bass player, he's not gonna be mechanical like a computer.
Yeah,
He's gonna maybe
exactly.
make
Exactly.
microsecond errors
Yeah.
in the bass playing that you might not perceive, but if you try to make that totally clean, it loses the heart and the feel. And
Yeah.
so that's where, like, a lot of times where, like, I try to tell people, like, sometimes don't like, putting out like, a 5th take versus the 100th take. The 5th
Uh-huh.
take is closer to what you originally intended as
Oh,
an
that's
artist,
interesting.
and
Yeah.
then you spend all your time trying to clean it up, and you actually
Yeah.
start second guessing yourself, and you start rewriting the song, and you lose the original intention, and as a producer, I like to hear that original intention. And if it's
Interesting. Yeah.
even if it's not totally perfect, but if it had more feel than the 100th take, I'll go with the 5th take because it had more feel. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like it's a choice that you hear, but, I think that it probably could come into play with writing too, because like, the initial drafts, like, maybe the 10th draft is better than the 100th draft, but you just keep on kind of you're starting to
Yeah.
rewrite the idea, and you're losing the feel, and,
Exactly. And you're
that's
constantly questioning yourself and how the story should be without ever testing it with other people.
mhm.
And
Yeah,
so
that's
I
the
think
problem.
that, and the other thing is that you do have to kind of write quickly today because it is different. I mean, you do have to be
Get
getting, not
product
not
out.
all the time, not like
Yeah.
like I said with fantasy or science fiction, they're getting it all the time, but you really should be trying to get out a
A
book and
consistent
then letting it
pattern.
go and then getting on the next one. So if you're constantly working on the same one too, it also slows down the creativity of moving to the next project and starting to work on something new.
It's definitely can be compared like in the way the world was, you could take 2, 3 years to do a record. Now today in
Mhm.
the kind of Spotify
Oh wow.
playlist, people are looking for your single like every month. Some people are looking
Well,
for songs every month versus every 2 years. And with
sure.
TikTok and Reels and Shorts, you could actually put out way more material than you ever did. You can actually be engaging
Mm-mm-mm.
with your audience 4 or 5 times a day with new material, and that is
Well,
not unheard of in the industry that was waiting for 6 months to a year or 2
sure.
years, and so, yeah, there's actually opportunities for people who are more prolific to actually throw the stuff on the wall and see what works in multiple mediums. You throw
Yeah.
a 90-second reel of a song to test it with your audience, and then it hits a million, and this one hits 10,000. He's like, okay, I'm getting a test of what's working and what's not working immediately. It's like that you never could have got before. So I think that gives a lot of power to people with the way the social media is that you can get immediate reactions from your fans depending
Uh-huh.
on how you do stuff. The flash publishing sounds interesting because it would have maybe a
Yeah.
similar kind of
Same
effect.
type of thing because it's really, those stories do not take as long, and you just, people read them quickly, but then it tends to be a lot on social media, the same thing because of the short
Attention span,
nature
yeah.
of it, and then you get immediate feedback. Absolutely.
Which is
So it's the
cool
same
because then
method.
you can build a base of fans that could get into groups, and then they get subscribed, and then they get into different areas, and I think it just is very interesting the world we're in, and but we're at our kind of we've gone over a little bit, and so we'll have to end tonight here. I always try not to go too far over for my.
Sure, sure, sure.
But to let people know from the audio, I do like to repeat the link. So there's a link below, KimberlySullivanAuthor.com. So if people click that link, what do they find there?
Yep, so that is my author webpage, and there you'll find all of the novels and the short story collection and a background about it, and obviously links to the sales sites. And also, I would ask people if they're interested to sign up for my newsletter, which is also on there, and so that I send that out with news about books, but also I love to travel. I live in Italy. I like good Italian food, so there are also lots
Yeah,
of lots
cool
of
thing.
tips like that in there.
That's cool. So KimberlySullivanAuthor.com. Please check that out. It will be clickable on the fully published versions of this. So if you go into the podcast description, that will be clickable. And we will be on many other platforms, including Apple and Spotify video podcasts later in our iHeartRadio as well. So by tomorrow, so like you'll be able to go wherever you like to listen or watch podcasts. You'll be able to see this or hear it. So thank you again for being on the program. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a great conversation.
Well, no, it's probably daytime where you are. It's nighttime where I am, right?
No, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, so I've got.
It's nighttime.
I'm
Well, it's
heading
not.
off to.
Oh, I'm early. I'm early evening, and you're really late morning.
Absolutely. Well,
Okay.
the time change that you guys had allowed me to do this because then I can sleep and get up tomorrow. But wonderful meeting you, and how nice to kind of virtually be in New Hampshire, even if it's only on Zoom.
Thank you very much, and yeah, have a great night. And I guess you're going to turn in tonight, but thank you again for being on the program.
I will look at this tomorrow. Yes, I won't see anything tonight, but I promise you tomorrow that I will take a look. And as you said, I will make sure that I show that it's already been done and everything. And thank you for the tip with Spotify. I will certainly be happy to put the 5 stars and everything there.
Okay, thank you.
Great meeting you. Thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation.
Good night. Bye.
Bye.